Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? We ride the stories of the West, campfire truths, trail dust, memories, saloon whispers, gritty human, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. New Mexico Territory, July 1876. Noon pressed on the Jornada del Muerto until the ground gave back heat like a stove. Cole Maddox rode with his hat tipped low, a bandana wet across his neck, and a second horse roped behind. The red grit found his teeth. It scraped his eyes raw. When the sun climbed straight overhead, the desert quit pretending to be generous. He kept the animals at a walk, hoof to stone, hoof to dust. He touched his knuckles to the saddle horn. 3 soft taps, a habit that kept his mind inside a rhythm while the country tried to peel it away. The trail bent toward a low wash cut into the earth. A yucca threw a thin blade of shadow on the sand. Somewhere past it came a sound that did not belong to heat or wind. A cry, short, frayed, human. Cole swung down. The leather creaked. He dropped the reins and let the lead rope drag. The horses lowered their heads and blew. He moved into the wash with his shoulders turned small and slow. Buzzards circled at a distance like distant soot. Under the yucca, a girl sat with her knees pulled tight to her chest, bare feet, cheeks streaked gray with salt and dirt. A stick clenched in both hands. The stick shook. Beside her lay a woman half mounded by drifted sand, one arm crooked toward the child and frozen in that reach. The bonnet had slipped back. Hair clung in dark ropes to her temples. "Don't touch her," the girl said. Her voice broke into pieces. She lifted the stick. There was more fear than strength in it. "I hear you," Cole said. He kept his hands where she could see them. "I am not here to hurt anyone." He crouched until the grit bit through his knees. The woman's face was pale where the dirt did not claim it. Lips split. He watched for the rise at the ribs and saw nothing. He set 2 fingers to the side of her neck and waited. Heat scalded his fingertips. Wind hissed over the wash. He kept still and counted the stretch between moments. There it was, feather faint, out of step yet there. He breathed once and let the breath go slow. "What is your name?" he asked the girl. "Lark." "Good name," he said. "I am Cole." Her eyes watched his hands the way a colt watches wire. "She is sleeping," Lark said. "She is trying to," Cole said. "We will help her try better." He slid his canteen from the strap and wet a strip of cloth. He wrung it with thumb and forefinger and touched it to the woman's forehead. He let water gather on her lower lip, dropped it a bead at a time until the skin shone dark. The cloth smelled like tins and sage. Lark inched closer and did not put the stick down. "Hold that shade for me," Cole said. "There is not enough of it." The girl planted herself so the sliver of shadow widened over the woman's face. A blue ribbon hung from her braid. The ribbon was frayed and dusty and still bright as a canyon flower. Cole watched it stir in the heat shimmer and felt an old tightness rope up his spine. He stood and stepped back to the horses. He unrolled a canvas from his pack and shook grit from it. 2 saplings lay dead along the washbank. He snapped them free and dragged them close. Rawhide thongs lived in his saddlebag wrapped in a twist. He cut a piece with his knife and set the canvas between the sticks, then propped it over the woman tying the rig to a stunted mesquite. Shade grew by small degrees. Even a small degree meant something. "Lark," he said, "keep your hand on her arm. Tell me if she moves." "She will wake up if I sing," Lark said. "Then sing," he said. The girl hummed a thin tune and rocked in a small radius. Cole lay his ear near the woman's mouth. Air touched his cheek like it had a long way to travel to get there. He lifted her chin a finger's width and kept the cloth cool. He reached for her wrist and counted again. 1, 2, 3. He tapped the saddle horn in his memory because the horse was too far away to touch. He checked the horizon. The light wobbled. The mesa to the north threw a line against the sky that looked steady. No riders showed against it. He let his gaze fall back to the child. "Who is she to you?" he asked. "My mama," Lark said. The stick lowered. She pressed her bare foot against the sand and made a small cave with her toes. "We walked until the night went away. Then the ground got too bright. Mama said to rest. Then she stopped talking." "Your mama is Ada," Cole said, as if the word could anchor a body that had drifted out. He spoke quietly so the child would not have to handle the weight alone. "All right, Ada, stay with me." He stood again. He pulled off his coat and folded it twice. He slid an arm under Ada's shoulders and an arm behind her knees and lifted an inch. Sand poured away like grain. He set her down and listened for that breath again. Still there. He moved back to the horses and worked fast. The coat became a sling tied with rawhide to the lead horse's rig. The knots were clean and small. He tested each by leaning his weight into them until the leather sang. Lark hovered close. "Can we take Mama home?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "We can take her somewhere that is not here." He scooped the girl with one arm and set her on the saddle. The little body weighed less than a bundle of kindling. She held to the horn with both hands. He climbed behind and settled her against his chest. He gathered the reins and whistled for the lead horse. The travois bumped once and then glided in the shallow wash. He looked down at Ada's face beneath the canvas shade. A fly landed at the corner of her mouth. He brushed it away with the wet cloth. He touched the artery at her neck for the space of 3 beats. The pulse met his fingers like a shy animal. He found the pace and matched his breath to it. "Good," he said. "We are moving." The horses stepped out of the wash and took the slope slow. Heat rolled in waves. Cole pressed his hat lower so the brim cut the sun. Lark leaned her head against his shirt and went rigid with the careful stillness of a child who thinks stillness can keep the world from breaking. He laid his palm on her back and felt the flutter of her ribs. He clicked his tongue. He tapped the saddle horn with his knuckles. 1, 2, 3. The line of the ranch lay far past the blue air on the other side of the arroyo and a stand of cottonwoods. The desert did not give them any promise. Cole put his heels to the horse and kept the animals steady. Behind them, the yucca shadow slid and folded. Ahead, the land turned to white glare and quiet. Dust lifted from the horses and drifted across the woman's face like a veil and fell away again. The canteen knocked the stirrup, metal on leather. Small sounds stitched the afternoon together. Lark lifted her chin. "Is Mama going to wake up?" she asked. "She can hear you," Cole said. "Keep talking." The girl began to tell her mother about the ribbon in her hair, and how the wind had tried to steal it, and how she made a knot so tight it would not let go. Cole listened. He rode. He counted. He kept the rhythm of 3 inside his hands and made it the only clock that mattered. The cottonwoods showed light on their pale undersides when the wind shifted off the arroyo. Cole brought the horses into the yard and swung down before the porch. The boards gave a quiet groan under his boots. He took Ada first, easing the coat sling free, and carried her inside with her head cradled in the crook of his elbow. Lark followed, 2 hands locked at the horn, until the last step. Then she dropped to the ground and came close ribbon bright against the dust in her braid. The room was cool because the shutters were drawn to slits. The air kept the smell of dry wood and tin. Cole laid Ada on the narrow bed in the back room and rolled her on her side so her throat cleared. He folded his coat twice and wedged it to keep her from tipping back. He touched the hollow at her neck with 2 fingers and held still. He let the world shrink to skin and pulse. 1 beat, 2, a missed step. A small catch, still there. "Hold her hand," he said to Lark. "Right there. Tell me if she squeezes." Lark climbed up on the edge of the bed and curled against her mother's side. Her bare heel left a print of powder on the coverlet. "Mama, we came to a house," she said. "There is a tree that looks like a dancing broom." Cole moved to the stove and struck a match. The sulfur-bitten light flared and went out once before it took. He set a kettle and fed kindling until a narrow flame licked the iron. From the high shelf, he pulled a small tin box with a dent in the lid and a faint stamp of an apothecary from back east. He opened it. Inside lay rolled bandage strips, a twist of rawhide, a small bottle stopper, dark with residue, a handful of blackened needles stacked like a tiny fence. He lifted the bottle. The label was gone, but the smell said carbolic. Clean sharp like a barn after rain, only harsher. He poured water into a basin and measured the carbolic by the way it colored the surface and bit his nose. He set a strip of bandage to soak. He rinsed his hands slow and careful, rubbed the seams of dirt from his fingers, then rinsed again. "She likes songs," Lark said. She looked at the door as if it might fill up with someone who knew which ones. "Then keep singing," Cole said. "Keep talking so she does not have to do all the work by herself." Lark's voice was thin and earnest and missed notes. It did not matter. Ada's breath found a quiet rhythm in it and kept to that small rope. Cole came back to the bed. He slid an arm under Ada's shoulders and lifted just enough to slip the wet cloth beneath her neck so the cool could sit at the artery. He brushed hair from her temple and felt salt grains where sweat had dried. Her lips had cracked clean through in one place. He took a spoon and lifted a spoon's worth of water and then let a drop roll down the spoon's back to her mouth. It sat a moment and then disappeared. He waited. He gave her another. He watched her throat. He went slow. A line of red marched along Ada's inner arm where infection had settled. The skin was tight and hot. He studied it the way a man studies a creek for where the water finds a way through. He took the smallest of the blackened needles and held it over a match until the point glowed dim and then faded. He set it aside on clean cloth. He set his knife to the flame as well, then let it cool enough not to burn and cleaned both in the carbolic. The smell climbed into the rafters. "This part is not for looking," he said to Lark. "Can you face the wall and tell your mama about that ribbon?" Lark turned her face away. The ribbon shivered when she nodded. "I found it in a box with dried lavender," she said. "It smelled like a sleepy day." Cole steadied Ada's forearm with his hand and pressed the blade to the tightest ridge along the vein. He worked tiny, not a cut so much as a pressure and a release. The skin gave a sigh and darkened at the opened point. He kept the cloth ready and pressed it. He did not watch the cloth. He watched Ada's jaw. He watched for the change there when pain tries to climb and finds the body too tired to open the door. He spoke into that space. "All right," he said. "Ada, you are in a bed. You are in shade. Your girl is here. You can fight as small as you need." He dressed the place he had opened and set a cool wrap along her forearm. He slid his hand to her wrist, felt the thrum listen to its story. He set the small needle at the rounded muscle of her shoulder and pricked down through the fevered swell to ease the pressure. The point slipped, then settled. Lark's voice quivered at the edge of a lullaby and then steadied again. Cole wiped the sweat that had gathered on his own temple with the back of his wrist. He did not notice the sting there until the carbolic caught it and made it sing. He took it without comment. He tore fresh bandage into narrow ties and set them aside. He sat on the stool between the bed and the narrow window and put his fingers to Ada's neck again. He counted in his head. He counted out loud under his breath when the numbers tried to scatter in the heat. 3 and 3 and 3, he said. "Stay with me." The kettle knocked as it warmed. He stood long enough to add more wood and to crush dried sage and a curl of willow bark into a small muslin bag. He dropped it into a second pot and poured water over it. The smell that rose helped the room feel wider. He held the steaming cloth over her face until the heat pushed back the dryness at her mouth. He soaked another strip and laid it along her calves where the skin was clammy. "Are you a doctor?" Lark asked. She had not taken her hand from her mother's arm. "I am someone who learned how not to waste people," he said. The shutters rattled when the wind came again. Dust hissed at the sill and found small ways in. Lark flinched at the sound, then kept still so her mother's arm would not feel her jump. Cole lifted the basin to the window and let a sliver of light find the surface. The water shone like glass. He set it back. He worked through midday and into afternoon by small measures. He trimmed Ada's nails so her own hands would not bruise her. He washed the dirt lines from her ankles. He lifted her every hour so her chest could clear, and he breathed with her until he felt the body resolve back into the shape of someone who knew how. He dozed once with his chin on his chest and woke with his fingers still at her pulse. He reached at once for the beat and found it stubborn as a burro. "Hungry?" he asked the girl. Lark shook her head, then nodded. "If there is bread," she said, small voice with a full belly of hope. He gave her a slice from the tin and a smear of cold beans. She took it to the chair and kept one knee propped against the bed so her leg touched her mother's leg. She chewed as if the noise might disturb the air, and took small sips of water between bites, like she had seen him do for Ada. Ada shifted once and let a sound escape. It was not words. It was more like a person remembering there was such a thing as words and not wanting to use them yet. Lark leaned forward so fast her bread fell. "Mama," she whispered, "we are in a house. There is a kettle that sings. The man is named Cole. He does not take off his boots." Cole almost smiled. He checked the bandage at Ada's arm. The skin around it had lost a fraction of its angry shine. He lifted the cloth from her forehead and cooled it again. He glanced at the window. The strip of sky there had gone from white to a color with depth. "Your mama needs the night to be quiet," he said. "We will make it quiet." He trimmed the candle so the flame would not gutter. He set the Bowie knife on his knee because the habit of it felt plain as breathing. He set his 2 fingers at the same place on Ada's neck and waited out the long country between pulses. He tapped his knuckles to the side of the stool. 1, 2, 3. He matched the clock inside his body to the weak drum in hers. The room grew warm with the work of the stove, then cooled when the fire dropped to coals. Crickets started up at the arroyo and fell silent when the wind pressed hard. Lark slid off the bed and curled on a folded quilt on the floor, with one hand still on the mattress where it could feel a vibration of breath. Her eyes closed but did not quite stay closed. "Does it hurt?" she asked, not sure who she was asking. "Yes," Cole said, and he did not look away from what his fingers were reading. "But your fear is heavier. Give that to me." She nodded and let her hand go slack. She slept. He kept count. Near midnight, Ada's skin grew hot under his fingers. Heat rose off her like a coal bit left open to air. He switched the cloth again and again, and still the heat mounted. Her breath tightened. Small tremors ticked along her arms. Cole took the basin to the window and brought back the coldest water it would give. He set the rag there, wrung it, set it to work. He spoke so softly, the words were more pressure than sound. "Stay," he said. "Stay where we can find you." Near midnight, the heat inside Ada climbed and did not come down. Her skin threw off warmth that beat against Cole's wrists. The small tremors along her arms became long pulls that rolled her shoulders and arched her spine. The breath that had kept to a quiet track broke and took to shallow skips. Lark woke with a start and clutched the bed frame with both hands. "Mama," she said. The word came out small and hurt. "Lark, Cole said I need you to hand me the blue cloth when I point." She nodded, mouth pressed, flat eyes large in the candlelight. Ada's jaw locked, and her legs kicked once, then held. Cole placed folded quilts along her shins and used a strip of linen to keep her from bruising her own arms. He did not bind hard. He gave her body room to fight without finding the edges of the bed. He slid one forearm under the back of her neck to lift just enough so air could find its path. He did not hurry. He did not stop. The sweat on Ada's temple ran into her hairline and salted the hair white in places. The red line on her inner arm had risen again, and the skin around it shone with fever. Cole took the small knife and flame and carbolic a second time. He worked in the quiet between jerks. He pressed at the edge of the tightness until the tissue gave, and the angry swelling slackened. The cloth in his other hand turned heavy. He set it aside and reached for a clean one. He kept his voice low and steady. "Ada," he said, "you are here. There is a kettle singing. There is a girl with a ribbon. You do not have to leave." Lark held the blue cloth out like an offering. Cole brushed her knuckles with the back of his hand when he took it. The touch steadied both of them. He soaked the cloth in cool water and laid it across Ada's brow. He lifted the muslin bag from the herb pot and pressed it along the sides of her throat so the heat would have something to fight besides bone and will. Ada arched again. Her back tried to bow off the mattress. Cole set his palm on her sternum and kept her from snapping against the edge of the bed. The strength of it came in waves like something larger than she was had hold of her and did not want to let go. Lark hid her face for 2 breaths, then lifted it again. She put her palm on her mother's forearm, as if she could weigh her to the earth. "Talk to her," Cole said. Lark swallowed. "Mama, the kettle is singing. It sounds like the brook that went away. The ribbon stayed because I tied the good knot. If you want, I can put it in your hair when you wake up." Another tremor came and faded. Ada's teeth chattered though the room was warm. Cole dried his fingers, took the horse needle, passed it through the flame, cooled it in a bowl, then set the point at the swollen muscle in Ada's shoulder. He pressed until the pressure eased under his hand. He watched her jaw. He watched her breath. He did not look at anything that would take his attention to the wrong place. He counted. He set the count inside his chest and moved nothing else until it met her pulse where it lived. 3 and 3 and 3. He felt the rhythm change like a creek that had been choking on stones and found a run of clean sand. Lark's voice thinned. "Is Mama an angel now?" "No," Cole said. He did not take his fingers from the place where the artery showed itself to his touch. "She is fighting. Angels do not sweat." Lark sucked in a shaking breath. She nodded and began to hum. The tune tried to be a lullaby and could not stay in one melody, which was fine. It filled the corners of the room and made a rope a person could hold. Cole changed the cloth at Ada's brow again. He lifted her and sat her forward a finger width so the breath did not have to climb a hill to get out. He fed 3 drops of water to her mouth and 1 more when the line of her throat moved. He set fresh bandage along the small cuts he had made. He felt the heat through the gauze. The shutters rattled and dust whispered along the sill, and a coyote spoke once from the arroyo before thinking better of it. Cole let none of it in. He trimmed the wick so the light stayed clean. He set the kettle back so the water would not boil away. He kept the Bowie knife on his thigh because steel steadied him. He placed his free hand on the bed rail when the bed shook so he could be the thing that did not move. Hours lived and sank. The room smelled of carbolic willow bark and clean sweat. Cole's shoulders burned from holding still. His back ached in the ways that told him he was doing what needed doing. His own throat felt raw. He drank and then put the cup to Lark's hands. She sipped and gave it back. They did not speak unless they had to. The work spoke for them. Close to dawn, Ada's body gave up the fight in a different way. The shakes dulled. Her breath dropped low and heavy. Heat still ran out of her, but it did not climb. It slid off like rain leaving a roof. Cole felt the change before he saw it. He went still and held his breath until he was sure he had not imagined it. The pulse under his fingers steadied. The missed beats that had teased and scared him thinned until there were almost none. He let a breath leave him that he had not known he was holding. He set clean sheets under Ada and rolled the damp ones away. He wiped her arms and face with water that was no longer cold but still fresh. He lifted her hair and towel dried it. He tucked her shoulders under the blanket and smoothed the coverlet with the flat of his hand. He set his fingers again at her neck and felt the drum still working inside her like a small, determined animal. Lark's head had dipped and jerked all night. Now it fell fully to the quilt and stayed. She breathed soft through her mouth, a smudge of dust on her cheek, one hand still resting on the mattress where it could feel the shape of breath, even when she slept. Cole let his chin fall to his chest. He slept sitting up for a small while with his hand still on Ada's pulse. A point on his back sent up a bright line of pain and woke him. The window had gone gray. The crickets had stopped. He listened to the room. He listened to the house. He listened to the women breathing in it. The sound made the place feel occupied and not just kept. The light came slow and gold. A strip of it found the wall, and then the edge of the blanket, and then Ada's face. Her lids trembled. Her eyes opened a little. The look in them was not quite here yet. She blinked. The breath that came next was deeper than anything that had managed the night. The muscle at her jaw softened. Lark made a sound in her sleep and woke herself. She lifted her head at once. "Mama," she said, voice a scrape. Ada turned her eyes that way. It took effort. It cost something. Her lips moved. The first try stirred only a shape that did not make air climb. The second try caught. One dry word came out. "Lark." The girl clapped her hands to her mouth. She shook with the size of the feeling that hit her. She crawled up and put her forehead to her mother's shoulder with great care. She did not cry loud. She did not need to. The thing that needed to be heard had already been said. Cole leaned back and let the breath go out of him through his nose. He did not smile with his mouth, but the set of his shoulders changed. He soaked the cloth in clean water and held it for Ada to drink from again. He waited for the swallow. He spoke only when the swallow came. "Morning," he said. "Glad you stayed." Ada tried to focus on him. Her eyes tracked slow. She looked at the ceiling like it might be a sky she recognized. She went back to Lark as if pulled. She did not seem ready to hold more than one thing. That was right. There was time for the rest. Cole sat his chair in the place it had kept all night and put his fingers where they belonged at the side of her neck. The beat met him smaller now, but regular. He felt it and set his own breath to it so they would keep the same time. The kettle ticked on the stove as the heat died under it. The house took a deep, quiet breath and held it in a way that did not feel like fear. Morning settled into the boards and made the room smell like scrubbed pine and old heat. The kettle sat quiet, the flame knocked down to a thin tongue that did not ask much of the iron. Cole lifted the cup to Ada's mouth and tipped a little water to the cracked place at her lower lip. She swallowed. Her eyes cleared by degrees like a window that had taken the night and wanted to give it back slow. "Where," she said. The word rasped and scraped. She tried again. "Where is this?" "My place," Cole said. "Near the arroyo, cottonwoods, in the yard." Her gaze moved to the ceiling, then to the wall, then to his face. She looked for something that would tell her what kind of man he was and did not find it in his eyes first. She found the knife on his thigh and his hands that knew work. She tensed. Lark felt the shift and pushed herself up with both hands, small palm pressing warm against her mother's arm. "It is all right," Lark said. "He made the kettle sing. He is named Cole." Ada's breath shortened. She tried to sit and failed, and the move pulled a thin sound from her throat. Cole stayed a step farther back and opened his hands. "I carried you in," he said. "You were half in the ground under a yucca. Your girl was fighting off birds with a stick." Ada stared at the bandage on her forearm. She swallowed again. "What did you do to me?" "I let out what wanted to stay and poison you," he said. "I cooled what wanted to burn you. Water carbolic sage, a steadier hand than I have had in a while." She worked her mouth and found no words there. The room held them for her. Dust hung in the slice of light at the shutter. The ribbon in Lark's hair had kept its color, though grit dulled the edges. Ada lifted a finger and touched the ribbon, like she could measure how close the world would let her get to her own child. "What are you?" she said to Cole. "Someone who learned to keep people alive," he said. He rubbed his forearm with 2 fingers, an old habit when the memory of it woke. The scar there ran pale and ropey. The sight of it brought a look to his face that did not belong to the room. Lark watched him do it. "He does that when he counts," she said to her mother. Ada's eyes came back to Cole. She looked over his coat hung on a peg. She saw where the dust stopped, at the line where a body would ride. She took in the neatness of the stove and the straight fold of the quilts. She measured the man by his order and the small things he allowed to be crooked. She tried to sit again. This time she gained an inch and let it go. She put her hand on Lark's hair and felt the weight. "Who sent you?" she asked. It sounded like a question she had asked too many times. "Did they find me?" "No one sent me," Cole said. He let the words anchor between them. "I was riding. I heard your girl. That is all." Ada closed her eyes. Opening them cost more than closing them. She did both and paid what it asked. "They do not like when I say no," she said. "They call me unsound." A doctor signed a paper he did not read. "The estate wants what my husband left, and for that they want her. They bring polite men with ink on their hands," Beaumont Cole said. He watched the flinch that crossed her face when he said the name, quiet like a horse that hears its bit jingle. "Back east money." She nodded. The nod stopped short because stopping short hurt less. "Ada Beaumont," she said. The last name came out in a way that put it at a distance. "Lark Beaumont," the girl said, proud and uncertain at the same time. Cole sent the cup down and pulled a chair closer with his boot. He did not sit. He put his fingers to Ada's neck again and felt what the night had left. The beat kept its own counsel and did not seem eager to run off without them. His shoulders eased a fraction. "You can hate me for being here," he said, not looking at her face and not giving the words any show. "You can hate that I touched your arm with a blade. I will take that. I will not take you dying in my bed." Ada studied him and found no show there either. She let her head sink a little into the folded coat that propped her. She winced and adjusted. Lark held the cup in both hands and looked ready to carry it anywhere it needed to go. "Drink," Cole said to Lark. "Your turn." Lark took a sip and looked at her mother before she swallowed, as if asking permission. Ada nodded, very small. The girl drank and then set the cup where her mother's fingers might find it without looking. A fly explored the window slit and puzzled at the light. Cole moved to the shelf and took down a tin of dried willow bark. He rolled a pinch into muslin with the steady speed of someone whose hands had learned this rhythm long ago. He looked at the scar on his forearm because it had asked for attention, and he had given it none. He was suddenly aware of the ache there, mostly memory. "My brother wanted peaches," he said, voice low and plain like telling a thing to the stove, and not to the people in the room. "It was a long summer. I was an hour late with water. The skin on his lips looked like yours. That was a long time back. I do not forget the look of it." Ada's gaze did not leave his face. She did not ask the next question. She did not need the history that would come with it. There was only this room and the sound a house makes when it decides to hold who is in it. Hoofbeats sounded in the yard light and careful. Cottonwood leaves turned their pale sides to the wind. Cole crossed the room and lifted the rifle that rested in a notch above the door. He held it in the way a man holds a thing he knows better than himself. He opened the door with his boot and stood to one side. A young rider sat his horse loose and raised his right hand with the palm out. "Mr. Maddox," he called. "Orrin Pike from the freight yard." Cole did not lower the rifle. "State it." Orrin cleared his throat. "There is a gentleman in town. Came on the midday coach. City hat, clean cuffs. He is putting papers on posts and paying for answers. He asked after a woman and a child. He said unsound in custody more than once. He had a name that sounded like Beaumont when he spoke to Mr. Ortega at the store." Cole let the rifle settle, but did not put it away. "You see his badge?" "No badge," Orrin said. "Just a folder tied neat. Boots that never met dust until today." Cole took that in. He did not look back into the room. "You seen me?" he said. Orrin shook his head. "I seen no one." He touched the brim of his hat to the doorframe. "Tell Miss Ortega I delivered the flour when you come by." "Go on," Cole said. He watched the boy turn his horse and move out at a trot. The cottonwood steadied. The yard took back its shape. He closed the door and set the rifle back in its notch. He stood a moment with his hands still on the wood. The room watched him. Lark watched him. Ada watched him. He turned and let the muscles leave his jaw. "Town is talking," he said. He did not add range or time or fear. He did not need to. Ada's hand found Lark's braid and held it. The ribbon brushed her knuckles. "My name stays Beaumont," she said, as if testing if the sound of it could send a signal through the wall. "It can sit there," Cole said. "It does not get to run this house." He He crossed back to the bed and put 2 fingers where they had kept vigil through the night. Ada's pulse answered. He matched his breath to it for a few counted beats. He lifted the cup. He set it to her mouth again. He gave her 1 swallow, then 1 more. The kettle on the stove clicked as metal cooled. The window line brightened and lost its dust for a moment, and the room felt like the kind of place where a person could stay. By afternoon, the heat slid off the roofs in town and left a shine on the windows of the Ortega store. Harlan Fitch worked at the forge with his shirt off one shoulder and a wet rag around his neck. A stagecoach dusted the main road like a brush. It stopped neat at the post in front of the mercantile and turned the air into a slow, brown river. A gentleman stepped down careful 2 fingers on the Rail City hat set with a small crease cuffs, clean as porcelain. He paid the driver with exact coins and a glance that said he did not mind dust, as long as it stayed where he could see it. He carried a folder tied with blue ribbon and a wooden board with nails already tapped in. Inside the store, Miss Ortega folded flour sacks and watched him through the fly screen. He lifted a paper and set it square to the post outside her door. He pressed the nail with his thumb and finished it with 2 quick hits of a small hammer he had brought with him. Another paper went up at the livery, another at the corner by the pump. The words were in a hand that did not waste ink. Missing, Ada Beaumont and minor child, Lark Beaumont. Last seen en route from New York. Subject of family concern, unstable temperament reported. Contact Thaddeus Crane, counselor. Harlan spat in the dust and wiped his palm on his pants. Counselor to who, he said, not asking anyone at all. The gentleman stepped inside the store and tipped his hat. He looked like a man who did not wear hats for other people but was willing to make a point. Crane, he said. Thaddeus Crane. Miss Ortega did not smile. We sell flour and beans, she said, not people. He set his card on the counter so it would make a small white island there. I am looking for a widow and a girl. The family wishes them returned to care. There are papers. There is compensation for those who assist. A woman by the bolts of calico held her breath and then let it go in a soft noise that meant she knew more than she would say out loud. Harlan leaned his hip into the counter and scratched his jaw. Man rode in here last week, he said like he was thinking of a shoe that did not fit. Bought flour and thread. Had a child with him. Ribbon in her hair. She liked the peppermint sticks. Crane turned his head by inches. Described the man. Rides like a man who fixes what he rides, Harlan said. He did not look at Miss Ortega, who did not look at him. Coat cut for work, not for show. Crane made a note in a neat hand. He asked 2 more questions and did not press when answers did not arrive on time. He smiled once with a mouth that knew how to smile without the rest of the face joining in. When he left, the papers in town moved with the wind. Back at the Arroyo, evening settled in the cottonwoods. Cole sat on the porch with his rifle laid across his knees and his boots planted at the edge of the shade. He had not done that since winter, not in this posture, not with the pistol on the small table, and the water pail by his left foot. Lark drew circles with a stick in the dust where the yard stepped down into path. Ada slept without sounds that hurt to hear. Cole touched his knuckles to the rifle stock. 3 taps quiet as breath. He watched the fence line and the gate by the last cottonwood. Light thinned until the yard held more shadow than color. The wind pushed once and left the leaves hanging still. Something shifted by the far post. It was not a rabbit. Weight pressed a twig and made it complain. Cole rose with the rifle in his hands and moved to the edge of the porch where the board met dirt. He did not shout. He did not look behind him. The figure cleared the gate, slow hood up, stair step, careful thinking he could come like a story. Cole aimed at the right-hand post and squeezed. The crack ran down the yard and back up the walls. Wood spat a pale splinter and left a fresh scar 6 inches from where the shadow had placed its head. You have 2 ways, Cole said, voice level. Walk out the way you came, or let me plant you here and learn your name in the morning. The figure brought both hands up and backed fast enough to show the legs wanted to run. He turned and took the fence in a clumsy lift and stumbled into the mesquite on the far side. He did not stop to see if there would be a second shot. There was not. Ada stood in the doorway with the blanket clutched at her chest. The room put a square of warmer light around her. Lark was at her knee, one hand caught in the blanket's edge. Ada's eyes found the mark on the post without being told to look there. She lowered the blanket by inches. You did not ask who he was, she said. I did not need to, Cole said. He worked the lever and set the rifle safe and let it sit facing the yard. He was not welcome. They sat outside until the sky changed from blue to ash. Lark climbed into Ada's lap and fell asleep with her mouth open a little, the ribbon coming loose. Ada wrapped the blanket around both of them and stared at the line where the yard met the brush. Cole listened for another misstep and did not hear one. When the first star came, he lifted the sleeping child and carried her to the bed. He covered Ada up to the collarbone and checked the pulse because his hand had its own chores now and would feel empty if he did not give it one. The beat was there. He let the house go to quiet. Morning put a clean line on the horizon. Cole came out of the barn with the pail and saw the buggy from town roll into the yard without dust on the man's cuffs. Black lacquer caught the sun. The horse's tack shone like it had been polished for the visit. The gentleman in the seat held the reins in a hand that had not needed to pull on many of them. He drew up without asking permission and set the brake with care. He stepped down. He touched the brim of his hat just enough to make a show of manners. "Cole Maddox," he said, "I am Thaddeus Crane, counselor to the Beaumont estate." Cole did not offer his name back. "This is private land," he said. "Which I respect," Crane said. "I also carry authority that crosses fences." He opened the folder and took out a sheaf folded clean. He held it so the seal caught the light. Temporary custody order for the minor child, Lark Beaumont. Protective placement until her mother's mental fitness is certified by a court. This comes signed by a judge. Cole let the words sit on the air and get heavy. He leaned the rifle against the porch post where it could be seen and not used. He stood in the yard like a gate hung on hinges that did not squeal. Ada stepped to the doorway with Lark behind her, both of them in the shadow. Lark's fingers found the ribbon at the end of her braid and twisted it tight. Crane glanced that way and then returned his gaze to Cole, because he had decided the path ran through the man in front of him. "I prefer to avoid unpleasantness," he said. "You can make that simple. Bring the child forward. I will sign for custody. There will be no need for the sheriff." "You do not have the sheriff," Cole said. Crane showed his teeth in what might have been a smile if it had warmth in it. "I do not require one for a civil order." "You require a way to put your feet on this porch," Cole said. "You do not have that either." Crane took one clean step closer. He looked at the bullet mark on the far post, then back. "You make choices that will not read well in town," he said. "Harboring a minor. Interfering with a lawful process." Cole's eyes did not move. "You can read what you like," he said. Ada's hands shook and then held. "You are not taking her," she said. The voice cracked. It did not soften. "She stays with me." Crane's face did not change. He adjusted the crease of his glove. "Mrs. Beaumont, the paper says you are unwell. Your family cares for you. The estate will hold your child in trust until you are settled." Lark pressed herself to Ada's side until there was no space at all between them. Ada bent without taking her eyes from Crane and put her hand on the top of the girl's head. She did not plead. She did not know how to do that anymore. Cole shifted so Crane's line to the door was gone. "You can leave your paper on the step if you like. I will put it where it belongs." "On a fire," Crane said, still without looking at the rifle. "In a drawer," Cole said. "Paper belongs in a drawer until the sheriff carries it." Crane studied him, the way a man studies a map that does not have all the roads. He looked at the posts along the yard and the clean sweep of the porch. He looked at the dirt that had not touched his cuffs. He put the papers back in the folder and tied the ribbon in a neat bow. "I will take this to court," he said. "There are judges who prefer ink to dust." "You do that," Cole said. "Until then, you will step off my land." Crane's jaw put a line in his cheek that had not been there a minute ago. He tipped his hat in a gesture that was correct and not generous. He climbed to the buggy, set the brake free, and turned the horse. The wheels crushed the line a chicken had scratched in the dust that morning, and then drew their own line all the way to the road. When the buggy cleared the grove, the yard let out a small sound like a held breath leaving a room. Ada's knees loosened, and she sat hard on the step with Lark in her lap. The girl wrapped her arms around her mother's waist and pressed her face to the cloth. Cole picked up the paper Crane had left on the rail. He folded it once, and then again without creasing, and slid it under a tin on the porch table. He looked at the bullet mark on the post and set 2 fingers there. The wood was warm. The gouge was clean and new. It caught a stripe of light and held it. The house felt different, not because the rooms had moved, but because a line had been drawn and would not be easy to sweep away. The house held quiet after the buggy left its neat track down the road. The paper Crane had placed on the rail lay under a tin of nails edge lifting with a stubborn curl. Cole stood by the table and looked at it until the words turned into shapes. He slid the paper into a drawer and closed it with 2 fingers so the wood did not complain. The bullet mark on the post caught the last of the afternoon sun and kept it. Ada slept again, the kind of sleep that comes not from peace but from being emptied. Lark sat with a piece of chalk stolen from the slate and drew a crooked circle on the porch board. then another inside it, then a dot. She did not call it anything. She rubbed it away with her palm and made it again. When the light went thin, Cole stepped into the yard and checked the sky. He watched the tops of the cottonwoods for how they moved. He smelled the air. Dust rode low in it, not enough to make a shape. He walked the fence. He set his hand on the warm gouge where his bullet had struck and felt how the wood had held. He came back inside and sat at the table with the tin box open and his shoulders set like a man gathering himself. Ada woke to the smell of coffee and wood gone to coals. Her eyes found Lark first and rested there. Lark had fallen asleep in the chair with her feet tucked under her and the ribbon caught under her cheek. Ada lifted her hand and touched the end of the ribbon. The gesture steadied her. Cole poured the coffee and drank half for the heat. He set the cup down and placed the Bowie knife on the table, not as a threat, only a weight to give the room a center. "They will come back with more ink," he said. He did not give it any drama. "There are ways to make ink look at us and nod. I know a man who will speak words that bind. He owes me air in his lungs." Ada watched his mouth as he spoke. She looked down at the bandage at her arm, then at the cup for the water she could ask for now without shame. "Who?" she said. "Amos Pike," Cole said. "San Miguel de la Paloma, a church that leans and still stands." Ada let the name sit. She did not know the man. She tested the idea that the world might make a shelter out of a sentence spoken in a small building. Her fingers tightened on the blanket. "Marry me," she said. And the words were not a question. They were a measurement of what she could carry. Cole did not blink. "I can stand and say the words," he said. "I can put my name where yours can use it." He let a breath leave him. "It slows men like Crane. It also puts you inside my house by more than sleep. You should know that." Ada looked at Lark. The girl slept with the determined stillness of the very tired. Ada's mouth softened in a way that was new in that room. She closed her eyes and opened them again. "I will not be taken from her," she said. "If your name is a door that holds, then we use it." Cole nodded once. He did not reach for her hand. He picked up the cup and lifted it for her. She sipped, then another. He set it down and stood. "We leave before first light," he said. "The air is kinder then." Ada pushed the blanket away and tried her feet. They did not hold her full weight yet. She set her palm on the bedpost and found the wood solid. Cole stepped close without touching. She looked at him and then put her hand to his shoulder and used what she needed. They crossed the small distance like a creek with flat stones just far enough apart to make a person think. In the barn the air held cool and the smell of cut hay and leather. Cole lifted the saddle to the mare's back and let it settle. He checked the cinch twice and then rested his palm there, as if the leather could pass calm from one animal to another. Behind the barn stood a small wagon that had carried fence posts and sacks of feed. He righted it, checked the pins, greased the hubs with a smear of tallow. He set a crate inside and tied it forward with rawhide so it would not slide when the ground asked it to. He filled the canteens at the well and hung them from the crossbar. He packed the tin of bandages, the bottle with its sharp smell, the knife that had done more good than harm, a roll of muslin, a Bible that had lived on the shelf without commentary, and a small purse of cartridges with the green of forgotten polish at their edges. He wrapped bread in a clean cloth and tucked cold beans and a strip of salt pork into a sack. He put in a sewing kit because Ada would not feel right without one. These were not plans on a list. These were hands putting things into a wagon because the road needed them. Lark woke when Ada lifted her. The child blinked at the dark room and then at her mother's face like she feared the light would erase it. She clung with both arms and did not speak. Ada kissed the top of her head and set her gentle on the chair while she tied the ribbon again. Lark held still and then smiled a little when her mother's fingers fumbled and then found the knot. Cole brought a shawl and draped it over Ada's shoulders. The fabric was not fine. It did what it needed. Ada picked up the small wooden box that had held sewing notions and placed in it a scrap of lavender and a button in the shape of a star. She slid it under the wagon seat where Lark could find it with small hands without needing to ask. She wrote nothing yet. She kept the box as a promise to herself when the house felt far. The yard had a different sound before dawn. The cottonwood leaves turned their pale sides to the breeze and made a whisper that was almost speech. A coyote called twice and gave up. The sky east of the mesa lifted by a shade, then another. Cole stepped to the gate and pulled the rawhide loop from the post. He looked at the bullet notch and then at his hand on the wood. He tapped his knuckles to the gate. 1, 2, 3. He helped Ada up into the wagon and tucked a blanket at her knees. Lark climbed to the seat and planted herself between them, with a look that said this was where she would live if given the choice. Cole tied the sling for Ada from his coat as he had in the wash, but this time it was to rest her shoulders against the seat and to keep the road from stealing what strength had returned. He checked the traces and set the lines in his left hand. He held the right ready if the mare needed a steadying touch. The door of the house stood open with the smell of coffee inside and the last heat of the stove. Cole stepped back in for one breath. He looked at the room as if it were a person. He closed the door with care and set the bar. He came down the steps and put his boot to the stirrup and swung up. They moved out as the first line of light touched the far ridge. The wheels found the ruts they had made hauling wood last winter. The horse stepped into her work without complaint. The wagon creaked in the places wagons do. The canteens clinked once against the iron ring. Ada leaned into the shawl and watched the yard slide away, not as a goodbye, but as a line being drawn from one place to another. Lark sat forward and pointed. "The sky is pink," she said, and then she set her palm to the seat as if she could feel the day through it. Cole glanced at the north. A smear of brown rested so far off it might have been a trick of tired eyes. He turned the mare toward the open country, where the ground lifted in shallow steps and the road bent around a stand of mesquite. He kept the pace even so the wagon would not knock the breath out of the woman beside him. He clicked his tongue once and felt the day take them in. He tapped his knuckles to the saddle horn. 1, 2, 3. The sound did not need to be loud. It was a signal inside the bones of the people who could hear it. The ranch slid smaller behind them until it no longer asked to be looked at. Ahead the land opened and waited without promise. The ribbon in Lark's hair caught the light and held it like a small, stubborn flame. The morning held and then thinned. By noon the land shivered with heat. The road was less a line than a habit, the way wheels remembered where to go when a person could not see the ruts. Cole kept the mare steady so the wagon would not pound Ada. Lark sat between them with both hands on the seat. The ribbon in her hair had found the sun and would not let it go. They crossed an open stretch where a dry arroyo had bitten a wide mouth into the plain. The far mesa looked close enough to touch and then far again. Air wobbled over it. Ada watched the horizon without blinking. Her breath went short and then longer. The shawl held at her shoulders. The bandage at her arm stayed clean by will and not by mercy. Cole checked the north. A smear rested there, small and brown. He looked again. It had spread. He set his tongue against his teeth and tasted grit that had not reached them yet. "Drink," he said. He lifted the cup to Ada, and she took a swallow that gave her back a little of her face. He passed the canteen to Lark. She sipped and held the metal to her cheek because it felt like a lake in a story. The canteen knocked the iron ring when he hung it back. The sound was a small bell in a hot church. The wind turned and found them. The cotton in the wagon creaked. Mesquite along the road bent so all the leaves showed their pale undersides. The smear to the north changed shape and rose on itself. It rolled in slow folds and then in faster ones, and the light to the east went flat like a door closing. Cole pulled a scarf from under the seat and tied it over his mouth. He glanced at Ada. Her eyes met his and did not waver. "Get low when I tell you," he said. "Hold the child." Adas put her arm around Lark and held on with both hands, one over the ribbon. The mare tossed her head and set her feet and snorted at what she could smell coming. The first edge of the dust reached them like the breath of a furnace. Then the wall hit. Sound filled the space where air had been. The wagon jerked sideways as if a hand had moved the world. Sand lifted and turned the day into a room with no walls. Cole pulled the mare's head into the wind and held her. He put the brake on with his heel and tied a loop of rawhide from the wagon rail to his belt. He dropped to the ground with his head down and his eyes slitted. The world pressed on his skin and tried to take it off. "Low," he shouted. The words splintered. "Cover." Adas pulled Lark to her chest and turned so her own back took the sand. The shawl flapped and tried to leave. Ada would not let it. Grit found her teeth. She swallowed and did not cough because that would cost more air than she had. The wagon lifted and settled. The mare danced in place. Cole kept to her shoulder and ran his hand down her neck in short strokes that said, "Stay and work." He listened and heard nothing he could use. He felt the rawhide line pull at his waist and gave it slack. A lurch came under the seat. Ada spun her head and counted by fear. 1, 2. The space where Lark had been was empty. "Lark," she said. The name tore her throat. "Lark." Cole felt the rawhide cut into him, and then felt nothing but the sound Ada made. He turned and saw a smaller shadow disappear in the brown. He threw a hand back at the wagon and found empty air. He went to his knees and then to his hands. The rawhide line went tight. He took his knife and sawed the line free. He tied the end to the wheel. He moved into the storm. He kept one hand on the ground and the other outstretched. Grit filled the seam between his teeth and his tongue. Thorns bit his palm and then his wrist. He pulled back, and the chola held, and he pulled again and left skin there. He tasted his own blood behind the taste of dust. He tapped his knuckles on the canteen at his hip. 1, 2, 3. He listened for an answer. The storm answered with a roar that bent, then straightened. Cole closed his eyes because they did not help. He felt for the shape of a bush and found a low yucca that had survived other days like this one. He put his face to the ground and let the wind go over him. He heard a sound that was not wind. It was a broken bird sound. It came from the right and low. He crawled that way. The thorns found him and he let them. He thought of nothing. He moved and counted. 1, 2, 3. His palm struck something softer than sand. It was a knee. He followed it to a small calf and then to a foot. He found the child curled into the only hollow the plant would give. Her hands covered her ears. Her mouth was open, but the wind took the sound away. He gathered her up. She felt like sticks in a sack. She clawed at his shirt and then knew him and went still for a breath. He put his coat over her head to make a small room. He turned his back to the wind and made his own shape larger than his size. "Breathe," he said, mouth against her hair. "Count with me." She nodded against his chest where she could not nod wrong. He pressed a kiss to the crown of her head, because a man can do that, and it gives no one else any say. He set out back the way he had come, and felt the ground for where he had left himself. He found the chola again, and felt the barbs take him, and told them to take their share and let him by. He counted in the grain of his teeth and in the heat along his face. 1, 2, 3. Ada had crawled to the edge of the wagon and tied her own shawl to the rail to keep from losing herself. She leaned into the wind and called until her voice was not a voice. She tasted iron and kept calling. When she saw a shape come out of the brown, she thought it might be the world itself. Then she saw the coat and the way it covered something smaller, and she moved on her knees across the ground and grabbed at the coat and then at the child inside it. Lark's face came up full of dust and tears. Ada made a sound that held every mile she had run. She pulled the girl against her and held on so tight that Lark squeaked and then laughed a little because laughing made room for air. Cole set his hands to the wagon rail and breathed with his mouth open. He leaned his shoulder into the wheel and felt the tremble go out of it by his own weight. Sand had piled on the windward side and made a wall. He turned and put his back there and took the beating the wall could not keep for them. The wind kept them for an hour or for a day. Time did not keep numbers inside it. Cole kept count anyway because that was his work. He poured a little water into Ada's hand and into Lark's open mouth. He did it again. He held Ada's wrist and felt the beat. He tapped the rail with 2 fingers. 1, 2, 3. The storm broke fast. It did not apologize. It ran out of itself and left the sky raw and white. Dust fell and lay where it had no business. The land looked peeled and new. The mare snorted and shook and leaned into the bit like she was ashamed of how much she had not liked it. Cole rubbed her neck with a hand that showed blood in the creases. Ada saw the blood and took his wrist. "Give me that," she said. "It is nothing," he said. She held the wrist until he stopped pretending. She pulled a strip from the end of the shawl and poured water until it made a clean line down his arm. Grit ran with the red. She picked out the bigger spines with her nails and did not let him pull away. He held still and gave a small nod when she found the worst of them. Lark sat with the canteen and watched them, and then held out the ribbon. "For Mama," she said, "to keep." Ada looked at the ribbon and then at the small face under the dust. She tied the ribbon at her own wrist for a moment and then untied it and put it back in Lark's hair because that was where it belonged. She smoothed the braid twice. She did not speak. Cole checked the wheel. Sand had packed into the hub. He cleaned it with a stick and a piece of cloth. He worked with the care of a man who has come very close to seeing how small he is. He checked the traces. He set the brake free and tested it. He put his shoulder to the wagon and moved it an inch and then another until the mare could take the load. He let the mare rest. He rested. The world held still long enough for the 3 of them to hear their own breath without the wind taking it. They found the lee of a tumbled wall that had been part of a line of adobe long ago. It gave shade that did not ask questions. Ada sat with her back there and Lark on her lap. Cole rinsed his mouth and spit, and did it again until his teeth felt like teeth. He washed his face and reached for the child and wiped hers careful. He did not try to get all of it. He left a little dust so the skin would not sting. He gave Lark a sip and then another. He poured 2 drops on her hands and watched her rub them together because the gesture made her smile. "Do not go," the child said, soft but certain. She did not say who to. "I am here," Ada said. She pressed her cheek to the child's hair. She looked at Cole over the top of Lark's head. Her eyes held a steadiness he had not seen there the day before. She did not name it. Neither did he. They ate bread that had picked up the taste of the wagon. They chewed beans that needed heat but did the job. Cole set his back to the wall and let the sun move enough to give the ground a different color. He flexed his hand and felt the bite the thorns had left, and let the pain be agency and not a claim. When the mare had stopped trembling, he stood and brushed the dust from her neck with his palm. He checked her hooves and found no stones. He pulled the wagon a foot so the wheel would not settle into the rut it had cut. He looked at the line the storm had left across the plain. It had redrawn the land in places where a person would never know unless he had known it before. Ado rose slow and did not sway. She tucked the shawl and set her hand with care on the wagon seat as she climbed. Lark scrambled up and planted herself between them, again fingers finding the seam in the wood she had found that morning. Cole picked up the reins. He tapped the saddle horn with his knuckles. 1, 2, 3. They moved on. The ground had taken a new skin, soft on top and hard below. The wheels rode it without complaint. Heat lay over everything like a held breath. The air smelled of wet dust without being wet. The sky turned a color that made the mare's coat look redder than it was. The ribbon in Lark's hair fluttered and then lay flat. The canteens tapped each other once and were quiet. Cole kept the mare within herself. Ada watched the land ahead and did not watch the land behind. The road bent toward a ridge where cottonwoods stitched a thin green line into the dry. Cole set his breath to the same count he had given the rail. 1, 2, 3. The wagon found the old track and took it. The day steadied enough for the sound of leather and wheel and small voices to mend what the wind had ripped. By late light, the ridge broke and showed a shallow valley stitched with cottonwoods. A small adobe rose from the scrub like a prayer that had learned to hold its own weight. The bell had no rope. The cross leaned, but did not fall. Whitewash clung where it could. Wind worried the shutters and sent a dry rattle down the wall. Cole drew the mare to a standstill and let the wagon breathe. Ada sat forward with both hands on the seat, her eyes fixed to the doorway that stood dark behind a warped plank. Lark pressed her palms to her knees and looked as if the church might come closer if she wished hard enough. A man stepped from the side door and stood with one hand to the jamb. He wore a collar that had been mended twice. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his face held the color of old bark. He narrowed one eye to make sense of the wagon in the glare. When he saw Cole, the lines around that eye loosened. "Cole Maddox," he said. His voice held the high rasp of a lung that had learned to work with less. "I have thought you were a story by now," Amos Cole said. He climbed down and set his boots in the dust. "I have a woman and a child. She needs rest." "I need words said." Amos stepped down the 2 stone slabs that were stairs. His hand went to Ada without asking, and then stopped there just above her shoulder, respectful of skin he did not know. He looked at her face the way doctors look when they remember something from a book and decide to believe the person instead. He took in the bandage, the salt at her hairline, the way the shawl sat around her collarbones. "We can bring her inside," Amos said. "The air is cooler by the altar. The roof keeps most of the wind." Cole lifted Ada down with an arm under her knees and one behind her back. She had gone light again. He felt the tremble that comes when muscles have spent what they had and the body keeps asking. Lark trotted alongside, small hands steady on the hem of her mother's skirt, so no space would open between them. Inside smelled of cedar candle wax and the dust that comes from feet over time. The nave held 3 rows of benches that had been planed by different hands. Saints painted on tin looked from the walls, with eyes that had faded to tender. The light came in through cracks between planks and made ladders you could climb if you were only light. Cole laid Ada on the front bench. The wood was smooth from other backs that had leaned here. Amos set a folded blanket beneath Ada's neck and turned to the side table for a tin cup. He poured water from a clay jar that kept the cool close to its sides. "Drink," Amos said to Ada. "Slow." She took a mouthful and held it like a secret, then swallowed. Her lips looked less like a wound. Her breath settled enough to be counted without fear. Lark stood near her shoulder and held one finger to the ribbon, as if to keep the world from untying it. Amos turned to Cole. "Your face says you want the binding," he said, keeping his voice in the room and not sending it down the hall. "Not tomorrow, not in a week. Now, Cole said. "So, the air will hold around her. So, a man with papers will have to use a different door." Amos nodded. He set his hand to his chest without meaning to, the way a man does when an old pain wakes. Cole glanced at him, and in that look was a field with a sky gone black, and young men running until they did not. Amos saw the recognition and lifted his chin. He went to the small cabinet at the altar and brought back a thin book and a stub of chalk. He did not open the book. Lark slipped a hand into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the blue ribbon that had lost some shine to sand and had kept enough to matter. She held it up. "This ties," she said, very sure. Amos smiled at her, with the part of his mouth that did not have to be a priest. "It does," he said. "It ties what should be tied." He nodded to Cole. "Stand with her," he said. Cole stepped to the bench and bent so the bench could be their altar. He took Ada's hand in both of his because one would be pretending. Her fingers were warm and dry now. He used his thumb to move a strand of hair from her brow. Ada looked at him with the kind of attention people give when the noise has been beaten out of a day. There was no show left in either of them. Amos stood at the end of the bench, so the light cut a line across the book he did not need. He spoke in the plain cadence of someone who believed words were tools. "Wesley Cole Maddox," he said, then caught himself and left the first name where it lay. Cole Maddox, Ada Beaumont. You come with nothing that shines except what you carry in your hands. You bring a child who knows your names. Do you bind your lives in the sight of God and this child? Speak as you are. Cole kept his eyes on Ada. "I am a man who rides fixes and counts," he said. "I cannot promise the sky. I can be here when the wind takes the breath from a room. I will stay when staying is the work." Ada's mouth trembled, then steadied. "I did not think there was a second road," she said. "I did not think I would be allowed to stand again and say, I want this. I want to be held in a name that will not be pried loose." Lark wrapped the ribbon around their joined hands. She went once around, then crossed, then pulled until the ribbon lay snug. The knot she made was the knot she had learned on a day when the wind tried to steal. The blue sat against Cole's sun-brown hand and Ada's small wrist and made both colors look honest. Amos raised his right hand, then lowered it, because Blessing did not need the show. He spoke over the ribbon and the hands and the breath between them. "By the words you have spoken, and the witness of this child, I bind you. What you carry together." Wind rapped the shutter twice as if to argue the point, then rushed along the wall. Ada let out a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. She closed her eyes and bent her forehead to Cole's knuckles. Cole touched the back of her head like a man blessing a field before rain. "May I?" Lark said, looking at the ribbon knot. "You may," Amos said. She kissed the knot and then put her small palm over it. Cole tapped the bench with his other hand. 1, 2, 3. The sound went into the wood and stayed there. Amos set the book aside and went to the clay jar. He poured more water and held the cup for Ada. She drank and then held the cup for Lark, who took a sip as if this cup held more than water. Cole lifted the end of the blanket and tucked it under Ada's shoulder. The church grew quieter, in the way a place does when it has done what it was built to do. The candles on the side table burned to low beeswax bells. Wax ran down in slow ropes. Amos set one candle closer so the light would touch the faces, without asking the eyes to work too hard. He sat on the bench behind them and rubbed his chest once under the collar. He looked at Cole with something like warmth and something like a debt settled long ago and still felt. "You carried me in a blanket like that," he said. "You were louder," Cole said. "I was young," Amos said. His smile went crooked and true. "You had to tie me down so I would not stand up and walk out of my own ribs." Lark leaned her head to Ada's shoulder. Her breath slowed. A smudge of dust traced a crescent along her cheek where tears had dried. Ada laced her fingers with Cole's beneath the ribbon. She tried to say thank you, and found no word that did better than the pressure of her hand. Amos rose and walked to the sacristy and returned with a small loaf and a pinch of salt wrapped in cloth. He tore the bread and gave a piece to each of them. He set the salt by the cup. Lark took her bite like it was a new kind of fruit. Ada ate and did not cough. Cole chewed and did not taste much. Hunger is a tired animal that mostly wants to be acknowledged. Outside, the light slid from gold to copper. Wind came again, not as a wall, more as a reminder that roofs and vows are both made by hands. The shutter clicked against the frame. Dust whispered where plaster had cracked. Amos spread 2 bedrolls near the front, where the floor stayed warm from the day. He laid a third by the side wall, where the draft did not pass. He set a small iron stove to draw a little heat from mesquite sticks. The flame made a sound like paper quietly folding. He left the front door unlatched so the church would not feel closed to anyone who needed it in the night. Cole helped Ada to the floor. She went down slow, not from fear, but to honor what her legs had given. Lark curled into the hollow of her mother's body, the way water seeks shape. Cole laid his bedroll so his shoulder would touch the bench if he reached out. He placed the Bowie knife between bedroll and wall and forgot it there. Amos settled on the bench with his back to the altar rail. He coughed twice and then stopped. His eyes closed, then opened. The look he sent across the room was not priestly. It was the look of a man who has watched people die and likes it when they do not. The ribbon stayed around their hands until Lark's sleep loosened it. Ada eased it free and tied it to the splintered peg at the end of the bench. The knot held, and the blue made a small, bright line in the dim. Cole listened to the sounds a church makes when evening gets inside it. Boards settle, wind fingers the cracks. A mouse thinks about a corner and decides against it. He matched his breath to Ada's and let the count run without numbers. He felt the pulse at her wrist without setting his fingers there. He reached and tapped the floor next to his bedroll. 1, 2, 3. The sound was barely there. It said what he needed it to say. Then he closed his eyes and let the stillness gather them, in a place where walls held and the air did not take what it had not earned. Morning lifted the adobe from shadow to pale gold. The ribbon still hung from the bench peg where Lark had tied it. Amos stirred the embers in the small iron stove and set a cup at the edge for heat. He made the sign of the cross without making a point of it and walked them to the door. "Your names are in my book," he said to Cole, a line written neat. "Come, take a look when it pleases you." Ada touched his sleeve. "Thank you," she said. There was nothing ceremonial in it. Gratitude has its own weight and does not need a shave. They rode at an easy pace. The church fell behind with its leaning cross and its bell without rope. Cole kept the mare loose in his hands. Lark drowsed and then woke and then drowsed again, cheek to Ada's arm. Noon brought a clean, hard light that did not carry the threat of yesterday. The wind ruffled instead of tore. When the cottonwoods of the arroyo showed their green, Ada breathed different. The house stood just where it had stood. A line of dust traced where Crane's buggy had cut across the yard and then blurred where the last wind took it. Cole drew the wagon into the shade and set the brake. He stepped down and felt the ground give under his heel and found that comfort. Inside the house, the quiet held. The smell was of scrubbed wood and cooled coffee. Ada lowered herself to the bed and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She let her bones settle where they could rest. Lark walked to the shelf and counted jars with her finger. 3 and 3 and 3. She looked at the tin of peppermint and did not ask. The next days were work without show. Cole fixed the hinge on the back door where it had squealed in winter. He planed a splinter from the table and sanded the spot until his thumb found it smooth. He took a bar of soap to his hands and scrubbed under his nails until the old days lifted. He listened as the house learned their voices. Ada brought order to the kitchen. She washed what needed washing and set tools where the hand could find them without looking. She opened the small notebook she had kept since before and wrote a short list by the edge of the page. Willow, sage, yerba mansa if it would take in this soil. She did not write that last part. She felt it. Lark sat with the slate Miss Ortega had given her once for a holiday. She pressed chalk to it and made a letter that looked a little like a fence post. She made another beside it until she ran out of room. She carried the slate to the porch and leaned it on the step so the sun would help her see her mistakes. Cole hunted an old square of pine and shaped it to fit her lap. Neighbors came by in the way of a place that knows when someone has come back alive. Harlan Fitch delivered a box of nails he did not bill for. He set it on the porch and wiped the forge black from his palm before he shook Cole's hand. Miss Ortega sent flour with Orrin Pike, who stood in the yard and looked everywhere but the door until Lark ran out. She stuck her finger in the flour bag and drew a little bird on the porch board. Orrin laughed and clapped once, as if he had seen a trick. Ada went to the yard after heat broke. She pressed her hands to the soil where there was a seam of darker dirt near the cottonwoods. She planted sage cuttings in a square as neat as the margin of a book. She set tin plates at the edges to reflect light. She spoke to the plants under her breath. Cole watched her do it once and then did not watch again. He brought water. He did not waste a drop. Inside, he cleared a corner of the barn. He scrubbed a plank wall until dust ran like silt and left the grain clean. He hammered up shelves from old boards and a ladder he had broken one winter and kept in case. He drove the nails true. He ran a plane along the front edge and cut the corners in a small arc so a hand would not knock itself. Ada laid muslin on the shelves and pinned it. She spread leaves in single layers. Sage for breath, mint for stomach and heat. A bitter bark she had kept in a small pouch all the way from back east. She set the mortar on the new bench and tested the pestle. It found the bowl with the sound of stone greeting stone. She measured where jars would sit. She left room for more. "Is this a shop?" Lark asked, nose close to the mortar. "It is a place where we make help," Ada said. She tied her hair back and twisted the ribbon around the knot for want of string. "People will come with small aches. We will have something to hand them." Cole leaned in the doorway, sawdust on his forearm like flour. "We can call it that," he said. "Help." The heat of the week softened. Mornings wore a cool edge that made breath visible for a step or two. One day the post rider lifted a hand at the gate and called Cole by name. He swung down with the ease of a man whose horse does most of the schooling. He pulled a stiff envelope from the pouch and did not hand it straight over. He turned it so the seal could catch the light. "From Santa Fe," he said. "For you." Cole wiped his hand on his thigh and took the envelope. The wax had the mark of a quart, a scale inside a circle. He did not open it there. He set it on the table inside and waited for Ada to sit. Lark climbed into the chair beside her and put both elbows on the table in a way that would have been scolded in another house. No one scolded. Cole broke the seal with his thumb. The wax clicked. The paper inside was thick and held the smell of ink that had dried in a room with shutters. Cole read first with his mouth closed. He read again with it half open and then set the paper on the table so the light could get at it. "Territorial recognition," he said. He gave the words as facts. "Marriage recorded in the register of San Miguel de la Paloma. Guardianship of the minor child, Lark Beaumont recognized under the household of Cole Maux and wife." He did not say the new last name. He let it wait for Ada's mouth. Ada reached. Her fingers hovered above the lines and then landed. She did not trace. She read. Her throat moved. She read again to make the ink stick as if repetition could sew it into the fibers. Water rose in her eyes and she blinked it away on a reflex that had been useful elsewhere. It was not needed here. "Say it," Lark said, bouncing once on the chair. Ada looked at Cole. He looked back with a face that did not rush her. She turned to the child. "Lark Maddox," she said. The name came out like it had found a chair. Lark repeated it 3 times like a game. Cole held the paper to his chest for a second and then handed it to Ada. She folded it along the line the envelope had suggested and slid it back into its sleeve. She set it on the shelf for the good plates as if it would rest easier there. She exhaled. The sound made the room feel warm. That afternoon, Lark took her chalk to the fence post by the barn. She looked at the wood the way writers look at paper when they are about to ask it for something. She made an M that leaned too far and corrected it with a second line. She added the rest in small, careful strokes. "Mama and Cole." She stood back and crossed her arms and nodded. Cole came from the barn with a draw knife and stopped to read. He did not touch the letters. He set his palm beside them and felt the wood. "You spelled it right," he said. "She made the M look like mountains," Ada said from the porch. "Because they stay," Lark said. The new corner in the barn began to smell like mint and sun. Ada sorted jars Miss Ortega had been saving for her and washed them with boiling water. She set them upside down on a clean cloth and watched the steam thread away. She labeled each jar in a hand that did not tremble anymore. Sage, willow, mint, comfrey. She wrote the name for a salve she wanted to make and left the jar empty because promise is a thing that can hold shape too. Cole brought in a rough plank the width of his forearm and longer than his chest. He set it on the sawhorses and chalked a line down its center. He took the chisel and tapped a small V to start a letter. He did not rush. He blew the dust from the cut and checked the line by touch. Lark stood at his elbow until he handed her a smaller chisel that would not hurt her if she forgot it on the ground. She tapped it at a scrap and made small shapes that did not need to be letters. "What will it say?" Lark asked. "Words to let people know what is in this room," Cole said. He chalked a B and then an A. He paused and looked at Ada. She raised an eyebrow and nodded him on. The chalk went again, Beaumont and Maddox Remedies. He left room under it and wrote in light strokes, tonics, tinctures, neighborly hours. Ada laughed once from deep in her chest. "Neighborly hours," she said. "Yours." "Mine," he said. He deepened the letters until they began to throw shadow. He sanded the edges and then rubbed a little oil into the wood with the heel of his hand until the grain spoke up. Trade took life in small ways. A girl came with a cough that sat high in her chest and left without it. Harlan's youngest cut his thumb on a nail and left with a wrap that did not stick to the wound. Miss Ortega sent back a jar of syrup thicker than it needed to be with a note that said her father had slept. No one said the word doctor in the yard. It was not needed. Cole carried sacks to the wagon and did not take money when people offered what they could not spare. He took eggs. He took a bolt of coarse cloth. He took nothing and called it even. Evenings ran long on the porch. The heat left in steps, and the air smelled like dust that had decided to be soft. Lark braided and unbraided her ribbon until the fibers rolled easy under her thumb. She leaned against the rail and watched bats take mosquitoes in the last light. Ada sat with the notebook and drew a plan for a small counter in the barn corner. She measured by thumb lengths. Cole watched the line of the yard and the far posts and then watched the two of them and did not think of the posts again. He set 3 nails in a row on the porch rail and tapped each in turn. 1, 2, 3. He did it for the sound, and because sound makes habits stay. Lark set her chalk beside the nails like soldiers. Ada reached and took Cole's hand. She traced the scar on his forearm once with the side of her finger. He did not pull away. The letter from Santa Fe lived in the good shelf and did not gather dust. The ribbon Lark had tied at the church lived on a nail by the barn door where the light hit it in the morning. The rawhide loop at the gate stayed oiled and pliant. The bullet gouge on the post lost its pale new color and began to gray with weather. Cole set his hand there now and then when he went by. It did not feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a mark that told the truth. Toward the end of the week, the air cooled enough at dawn that breath could smoke once or twice. Cole rose with the birds and took the draw knife and the chisel out to the gate. He touched the place on the post where the wood still dipped from his shot. He laid the plank across 2 sawhorses and set his chalk to the board a second time. He wrote without saying the words aloud. He picked up the chisel and the mallet and set the blade where the first letter would begin. He looked toward the house. Ada stood in the doorway with flour on her fingers. Lark skipped from step to yard and back again. Cole tapped the chisel. The sound was sure and clean as it entered the wood. Dawn came thin and clean. Cole set the plank across the sawhorses and chalked the letters again, smaller corrections inside the lines he had cut the day before. He took the chisel and set the edge to the first stroke. The mallet answered his hand with a sound that felt true in his wrist. Curl after curl of pine lifted and fell. He blew the dust away and watched the grain accept the shape. Ada stood in the doorway with flour on her fingers. She had a bowl under one arm and the smell of yeast riding the air around her. Lark ran a loop from step to yard, and back then settled at the sawhorses, and rested her chin on the plank. She held the small chisel he had given her, and made practice letters in a scrap that did not need to be anything more. Cole worked through the cool hour. He cut the last curve, and then the next. He rubbed the board with oil until the wood threw back light. The letters darkened where the oil went deep. He lifted the plank and held it so Ada could see. She came to him with her hands still dusted. She stood close enough to breathe the oil and the clean pine. Lark stepped in tight between them and tipped her head back to read. Maddox Homestead, 3 brands, 1 fire. Ada touched the comma with a flour thumb, and then the last word. Cole felt the place where her finger had left flour on the oiled wood. He set the plank down and reached for the drill. He bored 2 neat holes near the top edge. Lark held the coil of rawhide like a ceremonial thing and passed it to him. He fed it through and knotted both ends small and hard. They carried the plank together. Cole took the weight. Ada set her palm to the edge to steady it. Lark walked ahead like a scout with the ribbon drifting from her braid. The gatepost still showed the old bullet gouge, no longer raw, now gray and honest. Cole set the plank in place and tied the rawhide to the iron hooks he had set last winter. He pulled the knots tight. The board settled and swung a finger's width, then came to rest. Ada stepped back and looked. Lark clapped once and then covered her mouth because the morning felt like a quiet that a person should not break. Cole set his palm to the plank and tapped his knuckles. 1, 2, 3. The sound ran into the wood and down the post and into the ground. They ate on the porch, bread hot from the oven butter, scraped with a clean knife, coffee that did not need to be strong to be right. Lark wiped a crumb trail with her finger and left it for the sparrows. The morning opened into work, because that is what mornings do when a place is ready. Ada put the kettle on and set a small pot by it. The water trembled and then found a low boil. She dropped a muslin bag of leaves into the simmer and pressed it under with a spoon. Steam lifted and carried sage and mint and the sharp that told a person their chest might open. She wrote 2 labels and tied them with twine. Her hand kept to the line without hurry. Cole set a short fence around the herb bed to keep the mare from grazing where the smell was sweetest. He cut stakes, spaced them by the width of his boot, and tied slats with thin rawhide. He watered the soil in a slow circle until the dark grew and held. He watched the water sink. The sound it made was small and stubborn. Lark took her slate to the fence post she had already claimed. She brushed yesterday's chalk away with the heel of her hand and wrote again. The letters were still crooked. They tried and tried until they found each other on the same line. She drew a heart, and then another, and then stopped, because two were enough. Neighbors came and went with the ease of a place that knows where a door opens. A woman with a stiff shoulder stood at the edge of the yard until Ada waved her in. Ada pressed warm cloth to the joint and spoke about wood and work until the woman's face came loose. Harlan's boy brought a sack of nails he had found in a drawer and swapped it for a small jar that smelled of winter and green. Miss Ortega sent a loaf with seeds that cracked under tooth and a note that said her father still slept. Cole carried a sack to Orphan's saddle and took nothing because the carrying was the point. In the barn corner, the shelves were full enough to smell like a field in shade. Ada counted jars and turned them so the script faced outward. She eased a lid and checked for mold. None. She closed it and smiled to herself. She had begun a new jar for a salve and written the name on the label days ago. Today she filled it. Cole sharpened the scythe and hung it inside the door where it would not rust. He set tools in order by size and by use. He hung the Bowie knife on a peg near the bench inside the house where his hand could find it without looking. He placed the court letter on the high shelf and slipped a piece of muslin round it so dust would not take the edges. Lark found the small wooden box and turned it in her hands. It still held the lavender and the star button. Ada took the box and sat at the table with the bowl and the spoon pushed aside. She wrote a short note on folded paper. Her hand stayed even. She did not write a speech. She set the paper in the box and closed the lid. She rubbed the top once with her thumb where a little carved L caught the light. At bedtime, she slipped Este's box under Lark's pillow without saying the thing out loud. The sun rolled across the yard and made the sign flare and then quiet. The words held. A dust devil tried itself west of the cottonwoods and fell apart before it found the road. Cole walked to the gate and stood with his palm flat on the new board. He felt the heat in it and the tiny give of freshly cut fibers settling into their life. Ada came to stand beside him. She had flour on her forearm again and a damp curl near her temple where steam had lifted hair. Lark ran a circle and then another ribbon bright at the edge of her braid. The mare flicked one ear and then the other and rested a hoof. "Read it to me," Ada said. Cole did with his hands still on the letters, as if that might send steadiness into the wood. He read the comma like a breath and the last word like a promise a person could live inside. They went back to the porch when the light grew kinder. Lark slid off the step and chased shadows that jumped from the rails to the yard. Ada set the loaf to cool and took the ribbon from her hair. She tied it on a nail by the door where the morning would find it. The blue made a thin, bright line high enough that hands could pass under without catching. Cole sat and pulled his whetstone from his pocket and put a clean edge on a small blade. He did not need the edge now. He liked the sound of stone on steel. He set 3 nails in a line on the rail and tapped each in turn. 1, 2, 3. Lark counted with him. Ada shook out the cloth and laid it on the table and set 3 plates. The air at dusk stood still. Smoke from the kitchen stove lifted and rose in a straight line before drifting into the cottonwoods. Crickets took the edges of the yard. A nightbird called once from the arroyo. Cole went to the gate and put his fingers to the bullet gouge, and then to the rope knot, and then to the lower corner of the sign where a child's hand would touch when she passed. He tapped the wood soft. 1, 2, 3. He turned and looked at the house. Ada stood by the door with a cup. Lark bent over her chalk at the post and added one last line so the O would be round. The yard showed all the small marks of living. A dropped glove near the step. The shallow trench of wheel ruts now faded. The squares of new planting. The clean sweep where Ada liked to stand and look into the evening. Cole lifted the cup Ada handed him and drank. The water carried mint because someone had set leaves in the pitcher. It tasted like a field that had decided to say yes. He passed the cup to Lark and she drank and laughed when a drop found her chin. Ada wiped it with her thumb and kissed the spot because that was the way of it. They went in when the light left the porch. The room held a little heat and the smell of bread. Cole set the bar in the door and the knife on the peg. Ada drew the curtain where moths would try to find the lamp. Lark climbed into bed and reached for the pillow and felt wood there. She lifted the box with both hands and opened it. The paper made a small sound. She did not read it out loud. She smiled like a person hearing their own name called from a place they did not know they could reach. Outside, the stars came on one by one. The ribbon by the door hung quiet. The new sign rode its hooks in the night air and did not creak. The cottonwoods breathed. The house made the small noises of a place that has people in it. Smoke thinned and went away. The ground gave back the day's heat and then settled. When it was quiet enough to hear it, a soft tapping sounded from the porch rail. 1, 2, 3. Then nothing but the sound of 3 hearts keeping time in the same room. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.